Good morning. For those who don't know me, I'm Don Hetrick, and I have the privilege to read Father Rick's sermon today, titled Great. Who wouldn't want to be called great? After all, you might be remembered in history. There's Alexander the Great, Herod the Great, Pope Gregory the Great, Russian ruler Peter the Great, who was followed by Catherine the Great. Then there is Great Britain, the Great War, the Great Gatsby, and of course, Tony the Tiger. And remember, I float like a butterfly and I sting like a bee. Your hands can't see what your eyes can't. Your hands can't hit what your eyes can't see. Who's the greatest? Muhammad Ali. And I agree. On an airplane, Muhammad Ali was asked to buckle his seatbelt. The showman that he was, he answered, "Supermen don't need no belt." The witty flight attendant replied, "Superman don't need no plane either." Ali buckled up. For the second time, Jesus tells his disciples what will happen, that he was about to be betrayed by some people who want nothing to do with God. They will murder him. 3 days after his murder, he will rise alive. His disciples said, "Oh, that's nice." They didn't understand and were afraid to ask. Resurrection was a wonder too great for them. Sometimes I am amazed that the disciples did not grasp what Jesus said so plainly to them. Then I wonder, are we so different? Over and over again, we hear the message of Christianity. Love, sacrifice, death turned into life, the glory and the tragedy of it all. But do we pick what is easy and refuse to understand the difficult parts? Do we stand up for what we believe or question if something is right? Do we show courage and strength and spiritual grit when we need to? Some people say Jesus didn't know what was going to happen, that he innocently wandered Palestine, preaching and teaching, and then fell victim to a murderous crowd. But over and over again, the scriptures say Jesus knew what was going to happen. He saw what he was walking into, and that the power of his sacrifice would change the world. He knows he is going to be killed. That's where this is headed, because you don't challenge corrupt systems of power without paying for it, sometimes with your own blood. Walking along, the disciples got ahead of Jesus, who lagged behind to smell the roses or something, and they began arguing with one another about who was the greatest. When they arrived at the house, Jesus asked them, "What were you discussing on the road?" Their silence was deafening. Jesus sat down and said, "So you want first place? Then take last place. Be the servant of all." A small child stood near Jesus, so Jesus used him as an example. He put his hands on the child's shoulder and said, "Whoever embraces one of these children, as I do, embraces me." You want to see what a relationship with God is like? Look at me. You want to see what talking to God is like? Look at me. You want to see what walking with God is like? Look at me. Thus ended the lesson. A kingdom for children, even before Walt Disney. Jesus treated people with dignity and value. This is why so many of us are fascinated with him. Because over and over again, he talked about how God loves us and draws us to him. Jesus said, "Love God and love others." That's what it's all about. Love Everything else is commentary. The defining mark of Christianity is love. John wrote, I can go around talking about Jesus all day long, but if I don't have love, my words are empty noise, like a bell or a clanging cymbal. God loves everybody, even people who don't think God exists. Any movement that isn't about love isn't about God. Any movement that hates or marginalizes or belittles anybody else, Jesus isn't in it. At Jesus' time, children were the bottom of the ladder. Perhaps you have a child at home, perhaps a 6-year-old, but he still doesn't have a job. He needs things. He doesn't follow instructions. He's the only human being you know that can wash his hands without getting the soap wet. He has to have things done for him. In both the ancient Greek language and in Latin, the word child meant not speaking. They lacked the dignity of reason. They were helpless, weak, dependent, of little value. And so often in this world, it is the weak and the small who make those who think they are great look great. In the ancient world, only healthy baby boys were valued. If you were a girl baby, you were generally shut off from education or public life. Many babies did not grow up at all. Unwanted babies, often of poor families, were simply left to die, a practice called exposure. The head of the Roman household had the legal right to abandon a child outside the city at the dump. Sometimes they were rescued. Sometimes the child was saved only to become a slave. This happened often enough that hundreds of ancient names are a variation of the word kopros, which was the Greek word for dump. So when Jesus was asking, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus called a little child to him and placed the child among them and said, he is. Perhaps that child's name was Kopros. You see, in this world, whether it's athletes, Hollywood stars, or politicians, it is the great who receive the praise and attention. In this world, not in Jesus' world. When you welcome among you the poor, the weak, the needy, the humble, and the children, you are welcoming God. Amen.